Oh, howdy all. Grab yourself a beer. It's time for some Path of Exile discussion. Before each major patch recently, there's been a tech patch that's been coming out, and the 3.14.3 engine tech patch was revealed today. So this is a preview of the patch notes. GGG currently plan to release this on Wednesday, but that is not a firm promise that it's coming out Wednesday, and that's Wednesday New Zealand time. If there's delays, then this will be delayed. And they've even said that it may be delayed till next week. So, the intention of this fundamentally is to give more diagnostic information as to why the game is performing badly at various points. And then that can give you a bit of a sense as to some troubleshooting as to what you might want to do in order to fix that. So, firstly, the performance metric graphs come up when you press F1 during gameplay. They give you information on how long it's taking your PC to render frames and things like that. These are changing into one single graph that should be quite a bit clearer than the old ones. So this is the Vulcan performance metric graphs. At least this is a mock-up that GGG put out of what it's going to look like. So here you can see that where currently you've got three different graphs that are sort of hard to read. They're trying to have one graph that's easier to read. And I think this does look like it shows everything clearly. Having a look at the red line, you'll see that this indicates your CPU. So this is the amount of a strain that your computer's hardware is being placed under from things that are not related to rendering graphics generally. And you can see here that it's been pretty low, pretty low, pretty low. There's a little bit of a spike and then it recovers and it stays pretty low after that. It's also got hard numbers here, 3 milliseconds. So doing all of the computations necessary to produce one frame is taking your PC 3 milliseconds. That's an indication that your CPU is completely coping at the moment with the load that Path of Exile is putting it under. If this were to start getting more full, you would notice your PC starting to run a bit hotter, and if it were to actually fill up, you would notice really bad performance. Back on my old PC, which I had until only a few weeks ago, I would get this quite frequently when I was running juiced maps whilst also recording or streaming, although my new PC does seem to cope with that load pretty well. Next, you have the GPU section, which is an indication of how your graphics card is coping. So the first one's about your processor, the second one's about your graphics card. If this starts getting maxed out, the best solution is generally going to be to reduce the quality of the graphics that you're showing. Unfortunately, if it does max out while you're at minimum settings, the only real solution is going to be to upgrade your GPU, I would expect. And that's something that I think GGG should rethink the minimum specs for this game, because the minimum specs at endgame are quite a bit higher than they are during the leveling game. During the leveling game, older GPUs cope just fine, but I really do feel like you start needing a dedicated enthusiast graphics card by the time you start running maps that have, 4 sextants plus 1 delirium layer at least. Once you hit that point, playing a PC that has the game's current minimum specs will not perform well at all. Next, you have latency, the measure of your communication with the game servers, between your PC and the game servers. What I would kill for 16 millisecond latency, being Australian, it's, I think, very, very rare for me to see anything that's anywhere near that low. But that said, that's just the way it is. Finally, you've got a couple of other bars here that indicate, indicate how much of your visual RAM you're using and things like that. One of the things that's going to be key here is that it will be very, very, very easy to see if there is one specific issue that is causing your PC or that is causing Path of Exile to run really poorly on your PC. This will jump out at you and say, hey, I am the problem, in a way that's a lot clearer than the current graphs. Ultimately, I think this is probably the single biggest thing that's being done in the 3.14.3 patch, but this is going to be really, really significant. And then GGG is saying, if you're encountering performance issues and want to make a video of it to show us, please show the performance metrics graphs, as they will then help them troubleshoot it. So there's also some things about the shaders section. So the shader section is just a bar that's going to indicate how long it's taking the game to load various shaders. And GGG's suggestion is that if you are finding that this maxes out, and that leads to bad game performance, that will be the sort of things that players tend to refer to as texture streaming problems. The game will look really terrible when that's maxed out. And particularly, you may even see various textures are invisible for a period of time. If that's the case, then they're suggesting that if you have the capacity to do this, move all of the game's shader cache to a faster drive. That's not going to be an option for everyone, but if you have both a mechanical drive and a solid state drive, that can be a really good option. And it's something that will jump out at you really quickly because the shader bar, you'll have a colored bar appear in the shader section that will just fill up and it'll be really apparent. Now, there's also other ways that you can cycle through the performance metric states. So no graphs visible, frames per second and computer performance, and latency only, so communication only by pressing F1. And there's other ways that you can set up the default state. Lastly, there's been a couple of other minor changes. One thing that they've done is they've removed the button in the options panel that lets you clear your local cache. And that's because I think that that one of the causes of poor performance was people clearing their cache when it was not useful to do so. So the cache essentially is somewhere where your computer dumps all of the minimap information, all of the shader information that it uses semi-regularly during gameplay, and that can build up over time. I usually think that the optimal way for most players to clear this is once per league. You might find that if you play a lot, you might want to clear it more than once per league, but I'm just going to start with doing it once per league and seeing how that works. If it turns out that I need to do it more, then I can just manually do it. You can still do it manually, and I generally find that you will accumulate about 4,000 or 5,000, at least if you play a lot, you'll accumulate 4,000 or 5,000 minimap files per league, and obliterating those does definitely start speeding things up. But it doesn't really speed things up until you've got those many, many thousands of them. And so for anyone that's a more casual player, you might only enter 1,000 zones in a league, and you're not really going to need it. Maybe a lot less than 1,000 too. One thing that's noticeable here is that they've removed the 32-bit Path of Exile client because almost no one is using 32-bit Windows anymore. Someone did a bit of an analysis on Steam, looking at some of the Steam hardware stats, and it turns out that 0.31% of people who play games in general on Steam were running 32-bit Windows. I'm not sure how long it's been since 32-bit Windows was really a thing, but basically 64-bit has replaced it now, and so this is likely to have almost no effect unless you're running Path of Exile on like a 2010 era multimedia computer, in which case this might actually be a problem for you. Now, one last thing that's been made is that they have removed the ability to select high texture quality if you are not using an enthusiast graphics card. And when I say an enthusiast graphics card, I mean basically anything from an NVIDIA 970 and better. So any graphics card that was middle of the range in 2015 or better than that will still be able to run high texture quality on Vulcan. But anything that's lower than that, so things that were middle of the range in 2014 or that sort of era, those will generally not be able to use high texture quality anymore. Likewise, most multimedia PCs probably won't have enough VRAM to select high texture quality. The idea here is that GGG want to avoid a setting that people often select that causes really bad performance, and I think that's probably that is probably the right decision to make. Anyway, that's a quick overview of what's coming in this upcoming patch. Ultimately, the 3.15 expansion will follow on after this, but there are still plenty of people playing the Ultimatum League. I mean, I still need to finish off some of the challenges, some of the grindier ones. So there will be a little bit of time for this to get seriously tested. Not necessarily tested as thoroughly as it will be at league start, but if there are glaring problems, they should show up when you've got 10, 15, 20,000 concurrent logins over the few days after this patch coming out. So hopefully that they won't affect the league start itself. Of course, it's always possible that there's something in 3.15 that will cause serious problems. There's no guarantee that the league start will be smooth, but it is a good idea that GGG separate these patches out so that if there's a problem with this one, it can be either fixed or it can be rolled back before league start happens. Anyway, that's all I got on that. If you've got any comments or questions, fire away below. Otherwise, may your Val Orbs have interesting results.